Welcome to the Bare Marriage Podcast. I'm Sheila Ray Gregoire from ToLoveHonorAndVacuum.com, where we like to talk about healthy, evidence-based biblical advice for your marriage and sex life. We are a week out, less than a week now, from the launch of the brand new, totally revised Good Girls Guide to Great Sex and the Good Guys Guide to Great Sex. They are launching on Tuesday, I believe, and I'm so excited. I have today my daughter Rebecca on the podcast for the first part.
Hello.
Yes, my husband will be joining us later to answer some reader questions, but we are going to talk about what the Christian world, the uncomfortable truths that they don't want to talk about with regards to sex before marriage.
Yes, and this is why research is important.
Yes,
because
before we get to that though, I just want to do a shout out. This is not our sponsor. We don't have a sponsor right now. If you would like to sponsor this podcast, please let me know. But I do have an affiliate that I am totally passionate about. And if you follow my links, I will make some money from that. That money is going to go to providing transcripts for this podcast for the hearing impaired or those who are running after kids and don't have time to listen.
Yes.
But I just totally love Knix bras. Like, they changed my life. I completely love Knix bras. They don't have underwire. They fit in a totally unique way, but they actually do fit. Like,
yeah, because I've tried a bunch of different kinds of bras other than your traditional kind of underwire bras, and I find that usually they're just in essence glorified sports bras, right? And Knix is actually different.
Yeah, like they look really good. They feel amazingly comfortable.
Yeah, like Knix, in my opinion, in our experience, is the only like non-traditional bra that fits and makes you look the same as wearing a traditional bra, but even kind of better because there's less like it morphs to your body better.
There's no side boob.
There's no uniboob.
Like it's perfect. And there's even one that gave me cleavage, which is quite the
I mean,
feat.
it's just miracles
just keep happening. And Knix also has amazing leak-proof underwear, which is great for teenagers too.
Yep, or for people who just suffer with heavy periods overnight as well. It can help if you do like leak-proof underwear, like plus a pad.
Yes,
can often can help.
So go check that out. Use my links, please, because then the money will go to support this podcast. So Knix.ca or Knix.com. The links are in the podcast notes. All right.
So let's talk.
Yes. So here's the thing. And I want to say this from the very beginning because we're going to talk about two different scenarios that are uncomfortable truths that we in the evangelical world like to overlook. About
just we have bad answers for, which we'll get into.
Right. And before I do that, I do want to say that I believe that waiting for marriage for sex is a good thing to do. That this is what was intended, that this is overall results in much better outcomes, I think. And if you think about it, like back in the Old Testament, okay, when God was setting up humanity, when he was giving us his ideas for how to run a nation, a country, a family, why is it that he wanted sex for marriage? And when you think about it in that context, it's to protect people and to enhance intimacy. If you don't keep sex in marriage, then children are born outside of wedlock and they're not protected. And if you don't have lifelong marriage, then once those children are raised, then the wives can be discarded. And so having sex in marriage creates this bond that becomes stable and that keeps people protected. So it's a very protective force, and that's a good thing. And research has repeatedly shown this is a good thing.
Yeah, especially seeing sex as sacred.
Yeah, and then that's the other side of it. So it protects people, but then it also grows intimacy in a way, because when sex is seen as sacred, when real intimacy can blossom, that is a good thing. And I think that is what God intended.
Yeah, and so when we're looking at all these conversations, as we're talking to you today, we want to keep that in mind as what's the guiding force behind these kind of biblical principles, or that these principles that we see cropping up all throughout our history as Christians, right? With like our sexual ethic and that kind of situation. Anyway, that's what we want to talk about.
Yes, but here are a couple of uncomfortable. Here's some uncomfortable truths, and the first one is this: we're often told, in youth group especially, just wait until you're married to have sex, because everybody wants kids to wait till they're married, right? You got to wait till you're married. And how do we get them to wait? We threaten them and we bribe them.
Yes.
So the threat is this: if you have sex before marriage, you will either get pregnant, get an STD, get infertile or die.
Yeah, no, then this is, I can think of a Brio article for every one of
Yeah,
those.
and we've been looking through many of the books written to teenage girls for our mother-daughter book, which is due in at the publisher in 2 weeks.
And you would not believe the number, where it's literally, if you have sex, you will get infertile. Like no babies.
No babies ever.
Ever.
That's a quote from Dana Gresh.
Yeah.
A lot of it really does sound like, what's that movie?
Mean Girls.
Mean Girls.
If you have sex, you will get gonorrhea and you will die.
Yeah, and I think it was chlamydia.
Chlamydia.
You will get chlamydia and you will die.
Yeah. You will get pregnant and you will die.
The coach who's doing the sex ed, if you have sex, you will get chlamydia and you will die.
Exactly.
But a lot of our books sound like that. And so that's the threat. Then there's another threat. So that's the threat as in like really bad things will happen to you. The other threat is you will never be able to experience sex the way that God meant for you, because we're all like sticky paper, and sex is supposed to glue you together. And when you have sex with multiple people, you lose the stickiness, and then sex can never be as wonderful once you're married.
Yeah. So in essence, it's you are damaged goods for life. You are ruined. And then they say things like, but you can have a secondary virginity.
Which actually doesn't make logical sense.
It makes no sense.
Because, it actually doesn't make logical sense.
It makes no sense. And also, like, I will just put a little, like, a lot of people say, but the oxytocin and stuff, that there's a lot more to it than that. And a lot of people who are very pro, like, sex before marriage are willing to twist what research actually says to promote an agenda over actually looking at truth. And frankly, we don't need to be afraid of truth. So let's not use half truths with science to prove to people that they had sex before marriage, they've ruined their lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
It actually, there's a way more nuanced conversation going on there. It depends whether you're looking at like,
well, it's also like they say like, oh, well, because oxytocin is released, therefore, if you have sex before you're married, you're bonded. You know what else releases oxytocin? Being warm. Holding hands.
Yeah.
Hugging.
No, I mean, it's a bigger rush during sex, but
actually, not always. Like this is what I mean. It's very, very complex.
Okay.
And all the oxytocin does, in essence, is very short term. So what it's in essence is like you have to keep having sex in order for the oxytocin to keep the hits going.
Okay.
It's much more complicated than that. It's like, yeah, of course there's bonding stuff that goes on, but you also bond with your friends. You also bond, like bonding.
This is speaking from the woman who calls me after she breastfeeds her baby and she's in tears going, I just love my
Every
baby.
single time I nurse Vivian, I am so extroverted that I have to call someone and be like, my baby is so cute. I get oxytocin hits like nothing else, okay?
So, but you're right. It is a more
it's more
nuanced
conversation.
conversation.
So, yeah.
Yeah. But, so they're saying sticky paper.
Yeah.
So either you're going to die, you're going to not be sticky. And so then there's the bribe.
Yes.
So those are the two threats. The bribe is this. If you wait until you're married, you're going to have the most amazing sex.
Yeah, like just wait. And then when you have sex, how God intends, it's going to blow your mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could never imagine the gifts that God has for you. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Here's the uncomfortable truth. We looked in our survey of 20,000 women. We looked at women who had only ever had sex with one partner.
Yeah,
their
with
now
their
husband.
current,
Their now husband, and he'd only ever had sex with her. So people who had only ever had sex with each other, and we controlled for abuse.
Yeah.
And then we compared people who had sex before the wedding with people who had sex after the wedding.
Yep.
For
so
the
in
first
essence,
time.
in all cases, they'd only ever had sex with each other. This is, some of them were virgins on the wedding night and some of them weren't.
Right. And what we found is that if you wait for the wedding night, you have a 25% higher chance of having vaginismus.
Yep.
Yep.
And so we have proven that the idea that if you wait until marriage, you'll have the best sex of your life is false.
Yep. Now, what we're going to tell you about in the rest of this podcast is
why.
Why and how that does not need to be your story. And that's a huge part of The Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex and The Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex.
Yeah.
But this is an uncomfortable truth, and this gets to something deeper, which is we need to change how we talk about the reasons that we wait. Because what we're doing is we honestly are giving young people false information. And when you do that enough times, it's kind of like the boy who cries wolf.
Yes.
Eventually, they're not going to believe us on anything.
Yeah.
And we don't need to mislead. We don't need to make things seem rosier or scarier than they are. God doesn't need us to defend him.
Or lie for him.
Or lie for him. And there are good reasons to wait. And I think if we talk about those good reasons, rather than scaring them about the sex conversation, which really is far more nuanced, we would get further ahead. So let's talk about why it is that women have higher rates of vaginismus on their honeymoon.
And I think we have a lot of information from our focus groups that really elucidated this for us. Did I say that right? Elucidate? Yeah. Homeschooler. No, it's like elucidate to bring light.
I think illuminate is to bring light.
Illuminate. No, but there's also anyway. This is we will figure it out. But anyway, but it brought it to light. I think when I talked to a lot of women who have experienced vaginismus in our focus groups, and this is why we did the focus groups, try to tease this stuff out. Is what every single woman who experienced vaginismus who was in a non-abusive marriage said to us at one point. Is that they can remember a point before they were married where they almost had sex. Like they were panting. You know, the clothes were almost coming off and they stopped it. Yeah. And they turned it off and they felt so proud of themselves. And they thought, we are doing it. We're living a Christian life.
Right.
And then they get married and they have sex on their wedding night and it hurts and it's bad. And what they all said, every single one of them, was looking back, I wonder what would have happened if I had had sex that time my body wanted to.
Yeah.
You know, and they said, I'm not saying that they wish they'd had sex before they were married, like not saying they wish they'd gone against their conscience, but just what would have happened with their vaginismus if the first time they had sex, they were so incredibly aroused, they had a hard time saying no. And I think that really stood out to us when we were interviewing these women because, you know, these are a lot of women who still believe in a Christian sexual ethic that means that you wait until marriage.
Right.
You know, that's still what they believe. But what they're saying is they just wonder if it did more harm because the first time they had sex, they did it because they felt like, well, it's time. And it was so overwhelming, right? And it wasn't that they were forced. It wasn't that their husband was mean about it. They wanted to do it too, but they weren't going by...
Because what happens is you get to the hotel room or the apartment or whatever it is, you take off your clothes and you're standing there naked in front of each other. You don't know what to do. You feel awkward. You get on the bed and then he tries to put it in. Yeah. Essentially.
Or maybe even like, you know, a lot of people too, they said like they did things like you did the shower together and you do the whole trying to touch anything, but you're just so nervous and you don't really know what you're doing. Yeah. And then...
But you know you're supposed to have intercourse.
Yeah. And then you kind of feel like, well, it's been a while. Let's go for it.
Yeah. I guess we're supposed to go for it now.
Yeah. And it just doesn't end up good. And every single one of them just said, I wonder what would have happened if my first time I had actually wanted it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's the message. If you're yet to get married, that's the message that we want you to hear, is that the first time that you have intercourse should be because your body wants it.
Yep. And so so if you're waiting for marriage, don't just wait for a wedding ring.
Yeah. A wedding ring does not guarantee you're going to have good sex.
No.
Okay. The thing about good sex is that you need to be in a safe relationship. So that's vitally important. We know that
for it to be psychologically good,
it needs to be and women's sexual response is very tied to health. Not always, but it is.
When we're talking about good, we don't just mean orgasmic. We mean good in all sense of the word. Right? We have emotionally healthy, spiritually healthy, physically healthy, right? Yes. The spiritual and emotional aspect, you have to be in a safe relationship.
Yeah, and
right?
because about 20% of women, I believe, can reach orgasm without feeling emotionally close to their husband. So there are some women who aren't necessarily in a safe relationship, but the sex physically works well, but 80% need to feel. So again, with all this stuff, it's always nuanced, but in general, women do need to feel emotionally close. So they need to feel in a safe relationship for sure. That's a big part. But then there's just the sexual response cycle.
But
it doesn't change.
No, and I remember growing up hearing in youth group all the time, or through Brio magazine, or all these different Christian things, that people who have, like, girls who have sex outside of marriage don't have good sex, right? It's like they also be like, oh, you're just in the back of some guy's car and it's just not good, and it's, you know, you're just being used by him, and girls only have sex to feel like they're wanted, and that's not true. It's just not true, because orgasmic sex happens when you're aroused and then stimulated in a way where the arousal overturns into orgasm. It doesn't, your body does not know if you are married.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that's just the reality.
Yeah, and there's a lot of single people who are orgasmic, and
that doesn't mean to threaten the church.
But once you are married, you still need the sexual response cycle.
Yes.
Like you're not going to have an orgasm just because you have a wedding ring on.
Yes.
Okay? So we still need to work with our bodies.
Yeah,
And
we don't have some vending machine god that, like, just like slot in one marriage and then you get unlimited orgasm. It's like, that's not how it works.
And there's so many people, you get back to that hotel, you get back to that apartment, wherever it might be, and you're just kind of awkward, but you're not quite sure what's supposed to happen. And so, you touch each other a bit and then you figure, well, I need to do it now. Yeah. But you're also extremely tired because this has been the longest day of your life. You probably haven't slept much in the last week. You've probably come off of a really stressful couple of months. Many people get married like right at the end of something. So right after exam season, or, you're a teacher and like in the weekend after your final classes, or whatever it might be, like you're in the military and this is right after basic training, or whatever. Like you tend to get married when you have this break in your life of an extremely stressful life. So you've come off this really stressful time, this really long, tiring day, and it's bewildering. And when we asked women to explain how sex felt, a lot of them, that's what they said. They said bewildering.
Yeah, like overwhelming, or just kind of like deer in headlights a little bit.
I asked on Instagram this week about if people could do their honeymoon differently, what would they do? And this one woman said this. She said, ironically, I was prepared for sex months or years before my wedding when it would have happened organically, but we waited until marriage. And then on our honeymoon, it felt expected, assumed, maybe even coerced. Like I wasn't having sex because I was enjoying myself, but because it was now my duty. I was woefully unprepared for that feeling. I would have been much better prepared emotionally had it happened naturally instead of under contrived circumstances.
Yeah.
And a lot of women have told us very similar things. Like it's that on the wedding night, it just feels super awkward. And it feels like you can't say no because, you've been spending, I'm getting married in 412 days. That means in 412 days, I get to have sex, right? And that's what you've both been doing. You've been counting down the days until you can have sex. Like not until you're married, but until you can have sex. And then there you are and you want to have sex, but it's just really strange because it doesn't feel like it's coming naturally. And so, a big part in the Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex and the Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex is how to make it into a natural thing rather than something that we just have to do.
Yeah.
And for that, there's a 3-point plan. I've talked about this before. I'm going to reiterate it again. Okay. The aim is to first feel comfortable. Just feel comfortable naked together. Okay. Get over that awkward feeling. You have to be able to touch each other. It's okay to laugh a little bit, but you have to get over the awkward feeling. So you feel comfortable. Then figure out how her arousal works and spend a lot of time here. Like just hang out here for a bit. All right. Don't worry about intercourse. Figure out how arousal works, even for both of you. It's okay to touch each other. Your first time reaching orgasm does not have to be through intercourse. In fact, it's probably better in the long term if it's not. It's probably better if you can figure out how bodies work first. And, as we shared, go listen to the podcast we did a couple of weeks ago on the sexual response cycle, what the difference is between, desire and excitement and arousal and how those things are distinct. For guys, it doesn't feel like they are. He gets an erection, he's ready to go, kind of all feels the same. But for women, it actually does feel quite distinct. And when we start doing the things that you should do when you're aroused, like rubbing her clitoris, like finding her G-spot, like touching her breasts or whatever, when you do that, when she's not even excited, it feels like a pap smear.
Yep.
Okay, that's when it feels bewildering, which is what a lot of women told us.
If you could just put your feet up and I will proceed with the clitoral engagement for my required 8.5 minutes so that you are well enough lubricated for me to get in there. Like it's not hot, okay?
It's not hot. It really isn't. So, like what everyone says is they wondered what it would have been like if the first time they had intercourse and it felt natural, like their bodies wanted it.
Yeah.
And so that's how you get there is you spend a lot of time in the arousal, maybe even find a way to bring her to orgasm in another way first, and then and only then have intercourse. And some people could do that all in one night. And some people, it takes like a week or several weeks, or however long. It doesn't matter. But let me tell you, please hear me on this. It is so much better to take the time and not rush intercourse, but go at your pace so that you're comfortable and so you figure out how your bodies work, than it is to rush through something and then 10 years later realize she's never liked sex, and now you have so much unpacking to do.
Yep.
So just, get this right the first time. Because the way that we are doing the honeymoon isn't working. We should not have a 25% higher chance of getting vaginismus if you do what your youth pastor tells you to do. Yeah. Okay. And what often happens too is so we know that the obligation sex message is highly indicated in vaginismus. So when a woman feels like she doesn't have a choice, there's no time in her life when she's going to feel more obligated than on her wedding night.
Yeah.
Plus you've got the awkwardness, plus you've got the shyness.
Plus tired.
And you're tired. And then you try and it hurts. And now her body is going to start to tense up in a protective measure.
And it just gets worse
and worse. And it can get worse and worse. And so if it hurts, don't push it.
Yes.
We always hear, well, sex just hurts. No, it doesn't.
And people who say, well, sex kind of hurts the first time, what they mean is a tiny bit of discomfort that quickly goes away as you get aroused. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They don't mean that it hurts to the point that it's not fun. Mm-hmm. Like when people say that, they're incredibly ignorant of what sexual pain actually feels like. Because they think they felt sexual pain, but they haven't. They had a slight bit of discomfort as they were figuring out, oh, okay, that's new. And then they got aroused and it was like, yeah, let's go. Yeah. That's what they mean. And so if that's not your experience, then just see a pelvic physiotherapist. You can work through it.
Yeah, and most people who do experience pain the first time they have intercourse, if you stop and if you just kind of go back and do the arousal thing, it doesn't last. Like it honestly does go away. So we're not saying if you have pain, you need to go to pelvic floor physiotherapist on day 2 of the honeymoon. But if this is something which persists for
yeah, and if arousal does not help.
Yeah, if arousal does not help.
That's really what it is. If arousal does not help, and if at any point, you're in essence grimacing to get through.
Yeah, that's not a good thing. Please don't ever grimace to get through.
No.
All right?
But also, going back to what we said at the very beginning, the idea that saving sex for marriage is not because there's some arbitrary rule. Mm-hmm. This idea of, God saying that sex is sacred for the marital relationship, or for just for 2 people and it's only ever you guys. Mm-hmm. I think that we just get so many messages from women who have had sex before they were married who feel I did so well until 5 weeks before I was married or something. Mm-hmm. And they feel so guilty about it. And it's if we get back to the heart of a lot of this, is that really a problem? Mm-hmm. Really? I don't think that God is looking down at people who are having a very natural relationship and they were incredibly committed. It was just signing the paperwork in essence, and they were right there, and they're we slipped up, and then we're trying, but we're imperfect.
Yeah.
I just don't see the judgment of that in scripture that we see in the church.
Yeah.
And so don't let your marriage be bogged down by unnecessary guilt.
Yeah, because if you did something 5 weeks before the wedding, and now you've been married for 5 years, and you're thinking,
man, if I just hadn't had sex before the wedding.
Maybe all the reasons that we're having all these problems in the marriage is because we had sex 5 weeks before the wedding. God doesn't work that way.
No, when we say that there are problems with having sex before you're married, it's what happens if you meet and you guys are a one night stand and you immediately start having sex and you're so connected on the physical level that it's hard to really parcel out the emotional stuff. That's more of the stuff where it's we skip steps.
Yeah.
But if you're there's just a level where I'm just sick and tired of seeing people put so much guilt and shame on someone where it's stats show that actually they're fine. The only reason that someone in that situation would have worse sex is if they felt guilt over something unnecessarily.
Yeah. And so, it's just we need to be so careful and nuanced of how we see this.
And also,
again,
let's
this
remember
is a very modern first world issue. I've been doing a lot of genealogy. I love genealogy. Mm-hmm. And my family is very interesting. They were really poor. Mm-hmm. I think I had some Irish prostitutes in the early 1800s. I had an amazing con man in the late 1800s in England, and that was why that family escaped to Canada and never talked about it. I also had a lot of people who were married after having 2 or 3 kids. Yeah. Because in those days you didn't get married until the pastor came through town if you weren't Church of England, and they were all Methodists or whatever, and so there was a shortage of clergy.
And so in essence, you'd be in essence engaged.
Yeah, and you'd be living together as if you were husband and wife, and then you would get married and the kids would be baptized on the same day.
Yes, you have all the baptisms, you have the wedding ceremony, you have all that on the exact, make everything official all at once.
Yeah, and this was quite common in the past. And again, I'm not saying that we're not saying that you should have sex when you're engaged. That's not what we're saying.
We're just
saying that the emphasis that we put on
the wrong
this
thing.
as the main sin that you can do in your life is on the wrong thing. And we'll be talking about this more when our mother-daughter book comes out next year.
Yeah.
But it is a problem, and it's causing a lot of people anguish that I don't think God wants for us. Like when we get married, God says that we're now one flesh.
But also,
he doesn't get mad and punish you for something that you did 5 weeks. Like he is not punishing your marriage because you did something that you regret.
Well, and also like, remember, like Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7, if they cannot control themselves, they should marry. And he blesses those marriages. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but how do you know you can't control yourself? Mm-hmm. Like, that's still my question. Like, how does one know that they can't control themselves unless they have been not controlled? That's, like, logically speaking.
Yeah.
We look at 1 Corinthians 7, and, like, Paul's saying, listen, there's two people who really just want to be together, and they can't stop it. Just get married. It's fine.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
You know, and yet here in evangelicalism, we say if you have sex as a person, even if you you marry them, even just a couple of weeks, we've heard from people who had sex like 5 days before the wedding, and they feel like they doomed their marriage.
Yeah.
And it's like that's not healthy.
And again, the stats just aren't there. That is not what research says. There's a difference between.
It's not what research says, and it's not what Scripture says.
Exactly. Okay, so that was uncomfortable truth number 1.
Yeah.
Here's uncomfortable truth number 2. Mm-hmm. And this is primarily a male thing.
Yes.
Where men write in and say this: my wife was all over me before we were married, and sex was amazing before we were married, and now we're married, and she's dried up.
She turned right off.
And a lot of women will speak of it from the other side, which is, I really wanted it all the time before we were married, and now I just don't. And why did my sex drive stop as soon as we were married?
And a lot of people say is it's Satan. Satan's out to get marriages.
Or what a lot of men say is she defrauded me.
Yeah.
She was lying before she was married in order to get me, and now she has me, and she's holding back.
And these are usually religious couples, right? So remember, these are usually religious Christian couples who believe in sex within marriage, right? And when they were dating, they like wanted to save sex, but they just didn't.
Right.
Okay? Mm-hmm. So let's think about what makes a couple who wants to save sex for marriage not.
Right. So,
let's talk about that, right? Because it's not usually a logical, hello, let's talk. I would like to have the sex before we are married, even though we both have a conviction not to do so. What do you think, my lovely girlfriend or whatever? That's not usually how it happens, right? What happens is they're like watching a movie and they're cuddling and they're holding hands and then they're kissing and they're making out, and like 9 hours later, they're like, take my clothes off. Like,
yes.
It's
yes.
Usually it's not like a split second, oops, we had sex. Mm-hmm. It's like 9 hours. Or it's like they had like 5 days where they were on dates and they were talking and they were chatting and they were touching, and it just builds and builds and builds until all of a sudden you can't stop.
Right.
That's what makes couples who have a conviction to wait not.
Yes.
Is arousal is just so freaking high that they can't stop. The way I described it in one podcast, I think the You Have Permission one, is in essence like these couples are in essence having tantric sex for like 4 months.
Right.
Right? Where it's like just the traces along your neck and like it's all the stuff that's totally innocuous, but when you put it all together, it's like you're just so ready and raring to go.
Right.
That there's no stopping her.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And then what happens is they get married, and all of that ends. Mm-hmm. And now, instead of it being that she's so turned on, there's no stopping her, it's that he wants it and there's no stopping him. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how we were talking about when we were preparing for this podcast, was the idea is that before you're married, if you're trying to save sex until you're married, you're trying not to have sex.
Yes.
And so, in essence, the drive to have sex has to be stronger than your conviction to not have sex.
Right.
Which means arousal.
Yes, which means you really, really, really want it. Yeah.
Once you're married, there's no reason to not have sex in his mind, right? Because he deserves it now.
Yes.
This is what you get. This is the payment. I married you, so now we get sex.
Right.
And so there's nothing that makes her have to build it up. Mm-hmm. You know, like there's no reason for it to be arousing anymore.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the danger of, oh, we're not allowed to do this as much.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people say is, oh, the reason that sex is hot before you're married is because it's forbidden. And then once you are married, it's not forbidden. And
like, there's a level where some people, sure, of course. It's always exciting to do something that's bad.
But that doesn't seem to be what's going on in a lot of cases. It really does look like before you're married, too, the other issue is you're having sex or you're doing all these things because you're really hot for each other.
Yeah.
So it's like, I love this person.
Because it feels good.
I want to experience this with this person. I'm totally in love with this person. But once you get married, that dynamic can change. And instead of it being, I want to do this because I'm totally in love with this person, it's, I want to do this because this is what I'm supposed to get now.
Well, yeah, it's like, I want sex, and so you can't, like, why would you say no? Versus, like, I want sex, and so, like, let's make it so that, like, you don't want to say no.
Right.
Right? Like, there's a difference there. I'm not trying to say they're coercive. There's just a level where, like, listen, we all know how it is, right? And it's just...
Yeah.
When you get married, once again, it's not like her body suddenly changes. So if she was orgasmic before you're married and she doesn't enjoy it after, that means that something relationally has changed or something that you're doing has changed. And for a lot of women...
Now, just as an aside, pregnancy can change hormones and bodies.
Oh, totally, yeah,
stuff
but
like that.
just a wedding ring doesn't.
Yes, but a wedding
like
ring
a lot
doesn't.
of people, like you get married, you get a kid, and then pregnancy and breastfeeding hormones are just like have fun. But that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
But the idea of that, like we got married, and then like 2 months later, she just stopped having sex with me. And it's like, okay, so what I hear when you say that is, I was very attentive as a lover before I got married, and then when I got married, I was very entitled in bed.
Yeah.
Like statistics, because when I look at the statistics, that's what it shows.
Yeah, and even not entitled in bed. Maybe he was going through some of the same motions, but his attitude shifted.
But it's entitlement.
Right, but I don't mean like he didn't do the foreplay necessarily, because he could still be doing the foreplay. There's two different ways this can work. One is you don't do all the tantric stuff because you don't need to, and I think that's
much more common.
That's much more common, or at least it's significantly shortened. But the other is, even if he still is like all into the foreplay and everything, if he acts entitled.
Yeah, it's like you're only doing the foreplay because you know that you get to the end.
Right.
Versus like a lot of times, like if you're a couple who's again trying not to, like if you're together for a while, like you often just do things without having sex.
Yeah.
And how many couples when you're married don't do anything without having sex anymore? Right? Like how many times, like, and this is what I've wanted to like, what I've really seen a lot in the literature is the idea that female sexuality is very holistic in general, right? Whereas male sexuality tends to be more compartmentalized. Right. And that's not a bad thing. That's not like a problem. That's not
There'd be a lot more erectile dysfunction if men were more holistic, I think.
Yeah, I don't really know if that's the case either. But I think like in general, biologically, again, sex is different for men and women, right? So it makes sense that women's sexuality more tied to just in general, not just the relationship, but also like how she feels about her job and how she feels mental health wise in general and all these different things. Because it's like, can I afford to be pregnant?
Yes.
Right? Whereas men don't have to figure that out as much, right? And so when you look at this idea of how women often do better if sex isn't always just about intercourse, and if it's not like every single time that you touch me it ends up in sex, or every single time that you reach out to me I know it's like, oh right, it's been 4 days. Yes. Or like we don't kiss anymore and you're just not affectionate, and it's like, and then what men do is like, okay, well I'm gonna hold your hand more then, and then they figure out in my head, have done X number of things, I have earned 1/2 of one blowjob, and it's like that's not good either, okay? Like this is not it's not a vending machine, and I think this is what happens is before you're married, you see your who's then your fiance or your girlfriend as this partner of yours who like is this amazing person that you're so in love with, and you just enjoy getting to know her and getting to explore her and getting to do else, and then you get married and it's like, this is the person who is my sex.
Yeah.
How do I get my sex from this person? Yeah. And I'm not saying you're a bad person for doing that, but that's just the natural mental shift. And so we have to fight that, right? You have to fight that and be like, okay, I'm not going to be entitled about this. And I still have to realize that sexuality is more important than sex in my marriage. And having a holistic sexuality where like we are able to sexually and intimately connect without having sex. Yeah. And that's, by the way, not just an investment in future sex, but that is part of the experience.
Yes. And let me throw a little bit of the research in here.
Yeah.
When men approach sex with the entitled mindset. So she is obligated to have sex with me. Her orgasm rate decreases by, I think it's like 35. It's quite significant.
Yeah.
So her orgasm rate decreases quite a bit. Okay. That can be a large part. So before, she wasn't obligated to have sex because they weren't married, and so they were just enjoying it. But now he might feel obligated, and that's going to hurt it. But the other side of it is maybe he hasn't done any of these things. Maybe he hasn't actually changed, but she has, because she believes the obligation sex message. So before, sex was like this exciting thing that they were discovering and experiencing together, and then they get married, and now she's like, I have to have sex every 72 hours. I don't have a choice. Like Kevin Lehman said, if you're not willing to have sex every 48 to 72 hours for the rest of your life, and he includes your period in there because you're supposed to be giving him hand jobs, and postpartum because you're supposed to be giving him hand jobs or oral sex during that time, then you shouldn't get married. And so now it doesn't get to be this fun thing that you're experiencing together. Now suddenly it's this obligation, just like women feel on their wedding night. They were looking forward to the wedding night their entire life, and then they get to the hotel and they're like, now I don't have a choice. I have to perform. And so even if he's not the one giving her this message, even if he is more than willing to spend a ton of time on foreplay and all this, if she has internalized this message, then sex can be worse after.
And we heard that from some women in our focus groups, which was so funny. We heard from more than one woman who said that a couple of years into marriage, they finally talked to their husband about frequency, because they've been initiating every 3 days, like they're supposed to, as a good Christian wife. They've been having all this sex, and she's like, I know that you need it, and I know you have such a high libido. I'm just so tired. I'd really like to have more evenings to myself. And he was just like, I'm trying to keep up with you.
Yeah, he never wanted sex that often either.
And he's like, I'm good with once a week, bud. And she's like, oh my gosh, thank goodness. Right? And they had 3 years of her being like, oh, okay, let's do this.
And he was doing the same thing to himself.
He's like, okay, buddy.
My wife.
Let's get it going.
So,
you married a high drive wife, you will meet her needs. And she's over in the bathroom going, you married a man who has needs and you will meet them. And then they just talk and they're like, oh, yeah, no, we'd much rather just have a night where we're just snuggling, even snuggling naked and watching something, but you're no expectation to have sex. And in fact, having sex would be a little bit of a downer because you're actually just trying to connect
in other ways.
So, and I think that's just, we have heard that enough times. We think that might be the case for more marriages than people think.
Than we think. And so here's these two uncomfortable truths, is that the idea that sex will always be better if you wait for marriage, not statistically true. And in some cases it can actually be worse because of the way we do the honeymoon. Yeah. And so if we change the way we approach sex on that honeymoon, we can forestall a lot of those issues. And then the idea that some people just simply have better sex before they're married than afterwards, again, because of the dynamics of how sex is happening.
Yeah, and this is what we hear from, and I do want to say this really quickly. I spoke to the other group originally, but we hear from a lot of women, especially, who said, we've really struggled in this area of our marriage. Our marriage is really suffering and stuff. And we had sex we started having sex a couple months before we got married, and it was just so good. And then we got married and things just got rough. And I know that I ruined my marriage because I didn't wait. Yes. Statistically speaking, no, you didn't.
No, you didn't.
You having sex before you were married is not what ruined your relationship. It's not what ruined your marriage. It's just that this stuff is complicated. And we love to have these really easy little catchphrases to give people where it's this is what I did in my marriage, suffered. And so if my kids just don't have sex, then they'll be fine. Then they'll be good. It's not necessarily. Yeah. Again, we have to get to the messaging behind it, where it's about seeing the person that is in front of you and wanting intimacy and closeness and a healthy sex life with them. And that means seeing the sacredness of sex and not just simply seeing it as a hedonistic pleasure party.
It means feeling trust and confidence in the relationship, which means commitment should be there.
It also means that, it's more important that you connect with the person than that you get your dues. It means, because the thing is, if you do these things right with honestly good intentions, our studies have found, and other studies have found, that frankly in good relationships where people are really looking out for each other, where you have mutual goodwill, where you feel safe and secure. Like, sex just isn't much of a problem.
Yeah. So we just want to give that reassurance, because I know a lot of people are saying the reason I'm struggling is because we had sex before marriage.
Yeah.
And, you know, God is not punishing you like that.
No.
It doesn't work like that. That's not what surveys say. And it also means that you can reclaim this. This isn't something you need to live with the rest of your life. Yeah. And then to people who haven't gotten married yet, we just want to reassure you that you can start off well.
Yeah.
And please check out The Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex and The Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex for that. 2 great books. There's discussion questions in them, so you can go through them each separately and then talk about it before your wedding. If you're already married and sex just hasn't been working the way you want it to work, these are also wonderful books to read through together. They launch next Tuesday, and I'm so excited to bring them to you. But I think that we can do this better.
Yeah, and we just need to acknowledge that it's complicated.
It's complicated. It's nuanced. There aren't easy answers.
No. And I really hope that for the next generation, we can really teach them that the mark of a good marriage is not necessarily virginity. The mark of a good marriage is that you are able, you know, to treat each other as Christ loves the church.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. All right. I have brought my husband Keith on the podcast.
Hey, everybody.
So we're just a few days out now from the release
of
the books, The Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex, Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex. So exciting.
Great.
Yes.
March 15th.
We've been doing lots of podcasts and talking about it. And
yeah, I'm like on all these podcasts now. I haven't done that before.
Yeah.
I've only been on yours.
I know, getting out of your comfort zone here. So, so Becca and I have just been talking about some of the uncomfortable truths that the church doesn't like to deal with when it comes to sex.
So you mean it's not a simplistic thing that we can tell everybody and there's easy answers for everything?
Yes, like we actually need nuance. And someone sent me a question that I thought I would tackle with you. Okay.
Sure.
Really straightforward one. She said, can you talk about the saying, why buy the cow if you can get the milk for free?
Yeah,
so what do you
classic,
think?
classic.
What do you think?
Well, the first thing I'd say is, okay, it's basically what it's saying is, hey, women, don't give sex to him until you're married.
Yeah.
Right? That's the point. She's the cow, and why would she give the milk for free?
Right.
And I just don't think that that's a wise move to refer to a woman as a cow. I just don't think that's healthy.
There's definitely some merit there.
You're definitely, that's not I don't think it's appropriate anyway, but it's also not safe.
Yes.
But I mean, it also has this mentality of sex is sort of like a transactional thing, right? Like, so all he wants from you is sex. So, you know, if you give it to him, then he won't come back for anything else because he's got what he's want from you and now he's going to move on. And it's really sad. I don't think that all men are like that. I mean, some men are like that, but not all.
You know, the funny thing is, all right, I actually think this might be empirically true. Like if every single woman in the world went on a sex strike, I think you might get a couple more guys to get married.
Oh, yeah.
Especially, you know, guys, maybe your boyfriend, you've been wanting him to propose and he hasn't proposed, or the guy you're living with or whatever. Like it might actually be empirically true that if we didn't have sex that he would marry us. But is that really what we want? Like if a guy doesn't want to commit, then why do you want to marry him? Because that's really saying like what he wants is sex. He doesn't actually want marriage. And it treats sex like something which is very transactional, right?
Well, I mean, this is what Mark Gungor was saying in you were talking about last year, I think. You were talking about his marriage teachings, and he goes as far as to say to women, "You're crazy. You're stupid to do this. Like, why would you give him this? It's all he wants, right? Men, this is what men want, and so don't give him this until you get what you want." But either way, that is terrible. So it's saying that all men want is sex, which is not very good for men. But it's also saying to women, use sex as a weapon, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, as a guy, do you want to be married to a woman and then, you know, like, sex can be held over your head? Like, if she's upset with you about the color you painted the living room, she's not gonna have sex with you. Like, is that the way that sex is supposed to be in a relationship? I mean, no, it's supposed to be something we're both engaging in because we both want it, not because it's something that one person wants and the other person doesn't. So therefore, you choose whether or not you give it to him based upon how he performs, i.e. he marries you or not, or that kind of thing. Yeah, it's just a terrible way of looking at sex.
Yeah, and it's a terrible way of looking at marriage too.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah, because it assumes that men want sex and don't want marriage,
right?
And women want marriage and don't want sex,
right? And so you know you don't have sex so that he marries you. he doesn't really want to be committed, but now he's stuck. And so you can have the kids that you want.
Yeah. And a lot of guys feel that way.
Right.
Because that's the way they've been raised. They've been
Right.
told, you just want sex, you don't want marriage. It's like, that's not a healthy thing to tell men.
Because then they don't really understand emotional connection. And while I think that this was very much the way that we thought about it in the past, women needed to get married if they were going to have a family. This is what women really wanted. All they wanted was to have a family, and guys really didn't. Commitment just was a huge thing. And so it was easier to be single. And so the solution was, we'll make sure that sex is only for marriage, and then everyone gets what they want. I think that we need to rise above that.
Yeah, and that's very cultural. I mean, like, there are a lot of guys who want, like, even when I was a young man, I wanted to get married and have a family. I wanted to be a dad. I wanted to be a husband. Those are things that I wanted, and I think it's okay to want those things. And to sort of like idealize men as these like guys who just want sex and that's all they want, I don't think that's what guys are like.
No.
I think healthy men want more than just sex.
Yes. And if a guy needs to be bribed into marrying you, he's probably someone you shouldn't marry.
Yeah.
And so that's another big issue too. Okay. So there's one. Now, an actual reader question. I know that you love being put on the spot with these. This is your favorite part.
I always love giving advice to people I've never met before with complex situations.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Okay. But this actually, I like this question because I think it's really common. Like this is probably the most common scenario that couples face. Not the most common question I get, because it's not necessarily like as like DEFCON 5. Is DEFCON 5 the bad one or DEFCON 1?
I thought it was 4. I thought they only went to...
No, it goes to
4.
5, but I can't remember like which is which. Anyway, This isn't necessarily like a total crisis, but I think this is what a lot of couples are facing. So here we go. So she writes, my husband is great. He's a man that was set in his ways before we got married. And what do I mean? He washed the dark laundry on Wednesday and the lights on Sunday. After dinner, he always has to wash all the dishes. Every morning he makes the coffee and he brings me a cup and we watch the news. Okay, so very regimented guy. Likes certain way of doing things.
Pretty organized, sounds like.
But he is doing the laundry, he is washing the dishes, and he is getting coffee. So he's also involved. So that's good. Okay. So regimented but involved. My problem is my love language is physical touch, not sex. I have a very low sex drive. His is physical touch. We've been married 6 years. We both know the other's love language, but have felt rejected for so long. My husband won't go out of his way to hug me and give me random kisses because he's felt rejected.
So he won't go out of his way?
Yes.
But physical touch is his love language?
I think they might mean different things by that.
Okay.
I think sometimes people say physical touch when they mean sex.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
That could be it.
Gary Chapman says that that's not actually a love language.
No, I know that's not a love language. I don't think so either. But I think a lot of people sort of, I mean, sex feels good, right?
Yeah.
So people say, hey, I like sex. That's my love language. You know?
Right, yeah.
Same way that women say, like, you know, getting expensive stuff is my love language. It's like, you know, it's not really a love language, but okay.
I now feel that the only way to fix this is to somehow overcome my feelings of rejection to give him what he needs. I know once I do, he will give me what I need. The problem is I don't know where to start because it's hard to ignore my rejection and I'm just lost.
Okay, so what she's saying is she likes non-sexual touch, but he won't do that unless she gives him sex.
Right.
If she gives him sex, he might do the non-sexual touch thing, but he won't come with the non-sexual touch thing if she doesn't give him sex in the first place. Right. Okay, this is totally us when we got married.
Yeah, I know. Maybe that's why I think everybody has this problem.
Totally what we were like.
Yeah.
Because like I was a young man and I totally sexualized all my needs. Like my only love language was sex because that's what I was taught. I was taught, you know, wait till you're married and it's going to be amazing and it's going to, you know, and it feels really good and it's perfect and everything's great. And, you know, like all your baggage, all your insecurities, whatever, all sex will make it all feel better. Right?
Yeah.
So this is what we were like. And so, you know, I would not really feel affectionate to you if you were kind of shutting me out in the bedroom. And you didn't really feel like having sex with me if I was shutting you out by not giving you non-physical touch, non-sexual touch.
And it's like this mountain of hurt gets between you. Yeah. And
because you're both like, well, like, why should I give you what you need when you won't give me what I need? And it's like, you sort of feel like, you know, like I'm not asking for much. And you won't give it to me. So why should I go above and beyond for you when you'll give me the bare minimum? Right. It's kind of how you feel sometimes.
Yes. And it's hard to see over that mountain of hurt because of how strong your feelings are. And so I want to tackle this question. I do want to give a caveat that Oh, it sounds like this is an otherwise healthy relationship. Like she hasn't mentioned any red flags. So she's, there's no...
Although washing different colors on different days is like a little OCD, but
yeah. But there's no like, it doesn't sound like there's any character issues. It doesn't sound like there's any abuse. It just sounds like there's hurt.
Okay.
But no toxicity. So the advice that I'm going to give is really for a marriage where, there's just this distance that's grown, this drift that's grown, but it's not due to any toxicity or harmful behavior.
Yeah, because even marriages that don't have those kind of problems still get into these kind of situations, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I want to tackle the low libido thing for a minute.
Okay.
I said this.
So the person who doesn't really want to engage in sex.
Right. Okay. And I said this in The Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex and a bit in The Good Guys as well, too. But this was at the end of the book. So this is like after we figured out the orgasm piece, after we figured out, the marriage piece and making sure your marriage is strong and you feel connected and mental load, like after we figured out all of that and we're just looking at libido. Okay. Because libido and frequency is something that you tackle after you sort out all the other stuff. So what I'm about to say applies to people who sex does feel good when you have it, you have a strong marriage. And if sex doesn't feel good, then deal with orgasm. The books go into great detail on how to reach orgasm. We have an orgasm course, all kinds of stuff like that. Okay.
But by the way, I would just have to say that you're talking about how like you need to address all these underlying issues in your relationship before you start talking about frequency. Mm-hmm. Like you're saying that as if it's a normal thing, but I don't think most Christian resources talk like that. I think that's really unique to you. Like, but I just want to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So here's the thing people with responsive libidos need to know.
Okay.
A responsive libido simply means that you don't walk around and look at your spouse and go, I want some of that.
Instantaneous desire.
Ooh, I gotta get that, right? Like you don't necessarily feel sexy as you walk around, but that doesn't mean you're not sexual, and it doesn't mean you can't enjoy sex. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. This is so key. And I think when people get this concept, it can change everything, because we tend to think that being in the mood means I am actively wanting sex right now. But there's a lot of people who never actively want sex, or who don't actively want sex until after they have started kissing and touching and being affectionate.
We talk about that in the sexual response cycle in the Good Guy's Guide and the Good Girl's Guide, right? Mm-hmm. So some people, you have desire, like you feel a desire to connect sexually with your spouse. Then you start into excitement, which is sort of that kissing, holding hands, warming up. Then you move into arousal, and then down the rest of the sexual response cycle. But some people, they need that excitement first. Like there's some kissing and touching before they're like, oh, actually, this, I might want to have sex now. But the thought wasn't in their head beforehand. But once you start getting engaged, then it's like, oh, this is actually something I might want. Mm-hmm. And that's a responsive libido that you're talking about. And people who are spontaneous libido people don't realize that that's a totally valid way of looking at sex, because Hollywood and all the movies and stuff, they're all spontaneous libido. It's like, I'm excited, and if you really wanted me, you'd want me all the time, even if I'm like scratching my back with a little bristle brush. You still look at me and go, I want you. But the idea that we have to start kissing and getting worked up before you want me feels like a bit of a rejection for a person who's a spontaneous libido person. Right. And we need to get past that.
Yeah, because it doesn't mean that you're not as sexual, that you can't enjoy sex or anything like that. And the biggest sex organ that we have is our brains. And so when you start kissing and touching and you say to yourself, you know what? I want to feel amazing tonight. Yeah. I want to feel close to my spouse. I want to just go through tomorrow giggly and touching and affectionate, because that often happens after you have sex.
You get an oxytocin rush, you get a dopamine rush, you feel bonded. It's
I want to sleep well, because orgasm helps you sleep better. Like all of these things are good for me too. And so you start kissing and you're like, you know what? I want to do this. This is going to feel amazing. And you start paying attention to what your body is feeling, and you start telling your body this is going to be amazing. And you give all those positive messages, and your body tends to kick in, but we don't realize often that we have that power. Mm-hmm. And we think that we need to wait until our bodies magically wake up. And then we end up like having sex like 4 times a year or something, because we don't realize it.
So your challenge to the responsive spouse, the responsive libido spouse, is to start the process of initiating that excitement phase and seeing where it goes. And
Yeah.
maybe you will get desire, right?
Yeah, and I do want to say, like, one of the things we said in the Good Girls Guide, and this was actually Rebecca's line. She comes up with, like, all the best lines, even in the book she doesn't write. You know, we go out for walks with the grandkids, and we talk about this stuff, and she'll say a line. And I don't know what we're going to do when Alex is old enough to, like, understand what we're talking about.
Getting to the point where he's understanding things, we should probably...
But like, there's a difference between not wanting to have sex right now and wanting not to have sex right now. Okay. So like, not wanting to have sex right now is like, yeah, it's not really on your radar. It's not what you're thinking about. But actually actively wanting to not have sex right now is like, no, like I do not want to do that tonight.
Yeah. There's the, I'm opposed to this.
Yes.
And there's the, I wasn't thinking about it.
Right.
I'm open to it.
And I'm not saying that people who are opposed to it, like if you're just in the, no, cannot happen tonight. That's okay. Like that's fine. But if it's just more like, it's just not on my radar, well, maybe it can get on your radar.
Yeah.
And that's more the challenge. So so if you're more of a responsive libido, that's your challenge. But then I think there's also a challenge.
Yeah, for the spontaneous libido person, I think the big challenge there is to really value non-sexual touch.
Yeah.
Because the spontaneous libido people they get desire and they want to kind of race to the end of the finish line. And they want to go through the excitement, arousal, all these phases and get to the end. That's what they're sort of thinking. They tend to be very directional. And if I'm going to say she because often it's the woman that needs the warming up and she's the more responsive one. If she needs to have non-sexual touch for a while to find out if she's excited and aroused and wants to have sex, then the best thing you can do is just have lots of non-directional, just non-sexual touch just to enjoy each other without the sense that it has to go anywhere. Because if every time she starts kissing you or starts showing affection to you physically, you assume it's going to go all the way to sex. And that's the expectation. And she knows that's the expectation. She's never going to feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah, because often guys will say, well, I thought you wanted to tonight. And the truth is she doesn't know if she wants to tonight until after they've started kissing and see if the desire kicks in.
Yeah.
See if her brain can get in the right place. See if her body can get in the right place. And so she honestly doesn't know until you've started. And that's what I think a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah. And I think, so giving her the option to say, you know what, I thought so, but I don't think I'm really there tonight. You know, and being okay with that and just learning to control yourself and control your emotions, you know, with that kind of stuff, and not always to feel rejected because that's just the way that they work. But the other thing I would say too is just really trying to keep a low level of constant, like kind of non-sexual affection going in your marriage is really, really good, because then it's kind of more likely to stay on the lower libido spouse's radar screen. If there's a lot of kind of affection and stuff, if you never touch them unless you want to have sex, then they associate every time you touch them with pressure and obligation, and they're disappointing you if they don't, and all those kind of negative things. And you want them to associate your touch with positive things. So having a lot of, I'm just touching you because I love being around you and I love being with you and I want to feel you to feel good, and it may go somewhere and it may not, and that's cool. You know, that can really help build,
and that's
build
hard.
intimacy.
We understand that's hard. Like I think both
it can be difficult,
both partners are doing something which is outside their comfort zone. But I think that's what's important when we're looking at couples where there has been this drift and there's this mountain of hurt. Because what she's saying is, if I reach out and meet his needs, I know he'll meet mine. But the idea is he's only doing it because I did something first, so it's not real. Okay. And I think that's often the feeling is, I want my spouse to meet my needs spontaneously without me having to do anything, or else it's not genuine. And that's where we get into these impasses, which is where they're at. They're at an impasse. And I guess what I would just say is, look, if there's drift and you can do something about it, why are we always worrying about what's fair?
Yeah.
Sometimes just reach out and just take that first move. And if you're always the one to take the first move, then talk about that and say that's not right.
I think there's two things here. I think the first thing is, you know, if there is a situation where unless I have sex with my spouse, they don't treat me well. That's a different story. We're not talking about that. We're talking about but if you have sex with your spouse and they treat you better the next day because they're happy and they feel close to you, that's still real. Like they're not faking it. They actually do genuinely feel close to you.
Yeah.
And that's not faking. That's not unreal, like she said, right? And the second thing is, if you do feel like when you go through periods of drift that you are always the one that's, kind of trying to bridge the gap, I think you need to sit down and have a conversation about that. But I think you also need to be open to the possibility that maybe you're overestimating your contribution and underestimating your spouse's contribution, because we all tend to do that. I know lots of cases where people have had that kind of conversation where they said, I feel like I'm the one that's always bridging the gap. And the spouse said, that's funny because that's exactly how I feel. I'm always the one bridging the gap. And sometimes we don't understand each other's bids to connect. Like when we're trying to connect with each other, we don't always see that's what's happening. And it's really important to be able to recognize and respond to bids to connect. That's what Gottman talks a lot about, to build a healthy marriage.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so there we go. If you can bridge the gap and you can stop the drift,
ahead.
Do it. I mean, it's just going to bring the tension level down in your marriage. You're going to feel better. And these things, what's the alternative? Would you rather just keep the big mountain there? So sometimes we just need to step outside our comfort zone. As we're ending, I have some encouragement.
Okay.
Are you ready for it?
Yep.
Okay, so this is somebody on our launch team, a guy on our launch team for the Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex. He got to read an early copy.
So it's a review.
Yes, a review, and I will read it. So this is from Levi, and he says this. This book, The Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex, right here. Okay, here we go. Yes, this book has changed the way I look at sex. It covers it all. I was convicted by every chapter I read and learned so much by reading it and talking about it with my wife. Do you wonder if you can look at a woman without lust? Read chapter 15. Do you ever think, am I coercing my wife into having sex with me? Read chapter 13. Or is my wife supposed to orgasm when we have sex? Read chapters 4, 5, 6, I guess really all of them. Yeah, pretty much. Every man needs to read this book. It's been the hardest book I've ever read on marriage because of the way I viewed sex and intimacy. It's given me words and actions to take to redeem the damage that has been done in our marriage because of a lot of Christian books. Thank you, Sheila and Keith, for this amazing resource. I'll be recommending it to everyone.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's neat. That's really great. I love how he talks about how it was a hard book to read, but a good book, right? I think that when The Great Sex Rescue came out, you got a lot of reviews from guys saying that basically this is finally a book that treats men like they can be men, like, because I think a lot of guys feel like the Christian church kind of coddles men, that men are just big toddlers that want sex all the time and you should give it to them, women.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I think there's a group of men out there who are ready to stretch themselves to be better lovers, better husbands, better fathers. And I think this book really answers that. If you want a book that's going to tell you you're perfect exactly the way you are and you deserve everything and she should give it to you, The Good Guy's Guide is not for you.
No.
If you want to rock your wife's world, if you want to be the kind of husband that makes a difference in your marriage, it's good for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And Good Girl's Guide as well. So both those books, by the time we talk to you next time on the next podcast, The Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex and the all new, totally revised Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex will have launched. So that's exciting. They come out on Tuesday. You can get them now. There are links in the podcast notes for the books. And let's make these the go-to books for premarital couples, for wedding showers, and for couples who are just still trying to figure this out, who are already married, because I think the more people buy these books, the fewer people are going to get all messed up and need the Great Sex Rescue later. So yes, for that. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you again next week. Bye-bye.